Alright, Karina Baby for the 21st. It's a prickly problem. I'm going to sit close. I'm going to read a little bit quietly because it's late. Alright, so Dr. Dog and Nurse Kitty are visiting Mr. Badger, who lives in the woods. Now, you know about badgers. They're fierce animals, alright? They do anything they please. He has a bad cough. Dr. Dog listens to his chest with a stethoscope, and Nurse Kitty gives him a bottle of cough syrup. You must take 2 large spoonfuls twice a day, she says. They are just leaving when Mr. Badger hears someone sobbing outside his door. It's Bad Hedgehog. Oh, it's Baby Hedgehog. I've lost my mommy, says the prickly baby. Mr. Badger wants to help, but Dr. Dog says he must stay inside and keep warm. Well, we'll look for Mrs. Hedgehog, says Dr. Dog. Finding her is not easy because the woods are thick with leaves. They hunt around for a long time until Dr. Dog sits down to rest. Ouch, he yells, leaping up again. Mama, Mama, says Baby Hedgehog, running to her and running to meet her. Well done, Dr. Dog, says Nurse Kitty. You found Mrs. Hedgehog after all. The baby got her mama back. Oh. Mamas will always love their babies. You know that? No matter what. I know I love you, and I miss you. Jack the Giant Killer is the next story in our fairy tale book. In the reign of the famous King Arthur lived in Cornwall a lad named Jack, who was a boy of bold temper and took delight in hearing or reading of conjurers, giants, and fairies. He used to listen eagerly to the deeds of the knights of King Arthur's Round Table. In these days there lived St. Michael's Mount of Cornwall, and a huge giant, 18 feet high and 9 feet round. His fierce and savage looks were the terror of all who beheld him. His name was Cornmoran, and he dwelled in a gloomy cavern on the top of the mountain, and used a wade over the mainland in search of prey. He would throw himself a dozen oxen upon his back, tie 3 times as many sheep and hogs around his waist, and march back to his own abode. The giant had been doing this for many years when Jack resolved to destroy him. Jack took the horn, a shovel, a pickaxe, his armor, and a dark lantern, and one winter's evening he went to the mount. There he dug a pit 22 feet deep and 20 broad. He covered the top over to make it look like solid ground, and then blew such a loud and long tantrum that the giant awoke and came out of his den roaring. You saucy villain, you shall pay for this. I shall broil you for my breakfast. He had scantly spoken when, taking one step farther, he tumbled into the pit, and Jack struck him in such a blow that his head was with his pickaxe that he killed him. Jack then returned home to cheer his friends with the news. When the townfolks heard this, the valiant action, they declared that henceforth he shall be called Jack the Giant Killer, and gave him a sword and belt upon which was written in letters of gold, This is the vehement Cornish man who slain the giant Cormoran. Another giant, called Bloodbar, vowed revenge if ever he could have Jack in his power. The giant kept an enchanted castle which stood in the midst of the lonely wood. One day, some time after the death of Cormoran, Jack was passing through the woods while on his way to the Wales, and being weary sat down and went to sleep. The giant, walking by and seeing the words on Jack's belt, carried him off to his castle, where he locked him up in a large room, the floor of which was covered with the bones of men and women. Soon after he went to fetch his brother. Likewise the giant, too, made a meal of Jack. Likewise a giant, to make a meal of Jack, though the bars of his prison, Jack, terrified, could see the two giants approaching. Perceiving that one corner of the room a strong cord, Jack took courage, making a slip knot at each end, threw it over the giant's head, and tied it in the window bars. He then pulled with all his might till he had choked him. Quickly he slid down the rope and stabbed them to the heart. Jack next took a great bunch of keys from the pocket of Bluebar and went into the castle again. He made a thorough search through all the rooms, and in one of them found 3 ladies tied up by their hair of their heads and almost starved to death. They told him their husbands had been killed by the giants, who then commanded them to be servants to death because they would not eat the flesh of their dead husbands. Ladies, said Jack, I can put an end to the monsters and his wicked brother. I give you this castle and all the riches it contains to make some amends for the dreadful pain you have felt. He then very politely gave them the keys to the castle and went further on his journey. As Jack had but little money, he went on as fast as possible. At length he came to a handsome house, knocked at the door, and there came forth a Welsh giant. Jack said he was a traveler who had lost his way, at which the giant made him welcome and led him into the room where there was a good bed. Jack took off his clothes quickly, but though he was weary, he could not sleep. Soon after this he heard the giant walking back and forth in the next room, saying, Though here you lodge with me this night, you shall not see the morning light. My club shall dash your brains out quite. Well thought Jack, as these are the tricks you play upon travelers, but I hope to prove as cunning as you. Then, getting out of bed, he groped about the room, and at last found a large wooden log. He laid it at his once place in the bed, and then hid himself in the dark corner of the room. About midnight the giant entered the room, and with his belly gone, struck many blows on the bed, in the very place where Jack had laid the log. Then he went back to his own room, thinking he had broken all Jack's bones. Early in the morning, Jack boldly walked into the giant's room to thank him for his lodging. The giant started when he saw him and began to stammer. Oh, my dear, it is you. Pray, how did you sleep? Did you hear or see anything in the dead of the night? Nothing worth speaking of, said Jack carelessly. A rat, I believe, gave me 3 or 4 slaps with its tail and disturbed me a little, but I soon went back to sleep again. The giant wondered more and more at this, yet he did not answer a word, but went to bring 2 great bowls of hasty pudding for their breakfast. Jack wanted to make the giant believe he could eat as much as himself, so he contrived to button a leather bag inside of his coat and slipped the pudding into this bag while pretending to put it all into his mouth. When breakfast was over, he said to the giant, Now I will show you a fine trick. I can cure all wounds with a touch. I could cut off my head in 1 moment, and the next put it sawed on again on my shoulders. You shall see. He then took hold of a knife with his stroke, ripped up the leather bag, and all the pudding tumbled out upon the floor. "I can do that myself," cried the Welsh giant, who was ashamed to be surprised by such a little fellow as Jack. So he snatched up the knife, plunged it into his own stomach, and in a moment dropped down dead on the floor. Having thus far been successful in all his undertakings, Jack resolved not to be idle in the future. He therefore furnished himself with a horse, a cap of knowledge, a sword of sharpness, shoes of swiftness, and an invisible coat, the better to perform the wonderful enterprises that lay before him. He traveled over high hills, and on the third day he came to a large and suspicious forest, through which his road lay. Scantly he had entered the forest when he beheld a monstrous giant dragging along a handsome knight and his lady by their hair of their heads. Jack alighted from his horse, so he got down from his horse, right? We learned that word yesterday. And after tying him to an oak tree, put on his invisible coat, under which he carried his sword of sharpness. When he came up to the giant, he made several slashes at him. He could not reach his body, but wounded his thighs in several places. At length, putting both hands on his sword and aiming with all of his might, Jack cut off both the giant's legs. Then setting his foot upon the neck, he plunged his sword into the giant's body, as the monster gave a groan and expired. The knight and his lady invited Jack to their house to receive a proper reward for his service. "No," said Jack, I cannot be easy till I find out this monster's habitation." So he mounted his horse, and soon after came in sight of another giant who was sitting on a block of tinder. Jack alighted himself from his horse, and putting on his invisible coat, approached and aimed a blow at the giant's head, but he only cut off his nose. Oh, this the giant seized his club and thrashed about unmercifully. "Nay," says Jack, "if this be the case, I'd better dispatch you." So, jumping upon the block, he stabled himself in the back, and the giant dropped down dead. So jumping upon the block, he stabbed him in the back, and the giant dropped down dead. Jack then proceeded on his journey, and traveled over hills and dales. Arriving at the foot of a high mountain, he knocked at the door of a lonely house, where an old lady let him in. When Jack was seated, the hermit addressed him thus: "My son, on the top of this mountain is an enchanted castle, kept by the giant Galantrus, and a vile magician. I lament that fate of a duke's daughter whom they seized, and she was walking in her father's garden, and brought here after transforming her into a deer. Just promised that in the morning, at the risk of his own life, he would break the enchantment." When he had climbed up to the top of the mountain, he saw two fiery griffins, but he passed between them without the least fear, for they could not see him in his invisible cloak. On the castle gate he found a golden trumpet, under which were written these lines: "Whoever can this trumpet's blow shall cause the giants overthrown." As soon as Jack had read This, he seized the trumpet and blew a shrill blast, which made the gate fly open, and the very castle itself trembled. The giant and the conjurer now knew their wicked course was at an end, and they stood biting their nails and shaking with fear. With his sword of sharpness, Jack soon killed the giant, and the magician was then carried away by a whirlwind. Every knight and beautiful lady who had been changed into a bird or a beast returned to their proper shape. The castle vanished away like smoke, and the head of the giant Galantrius was sent to King Arthur. The knights and ladies rested that night at an old man's homage, and the next day they set out for their court. Jack went up to the king and gave his majesty an account of all his fierce battles. Jack's fame had now spread through the whole country, and at the king's desire the duke gave Jack his daughter in marriage, to the joy of the entire kingdom. After this, the king gave him a large estate, on which he and his lady lived the rest of their lives in joy and contentment. Joy and contentment. Alright, Karina baby, let's do Lila Tove and good night to you. Lila Tove, may your dreams come true. We sing Lila Tove, may Israel protect you throughout the night until we reach the morning light. I love you so much. I'll do anything for you. I miss you so much, my baby. I love you and I miss you so much. I love you, honey. Like Papa always used to say, Mama's Papa's sun, Papa's my moon, and you are our rainbow baby. Quite literally, you're our rainbow baby. We both love you, honey. We both love you so much. Mama and Papa just need to find a way to work things out so that this way I get to see you. I love you more than you could imagine. I miss you more than you know. I love you so much, my angel. I love you.